Rasmus is one of the three artists forming SUPERFLEX. For all of you who remember the exhibition, a very sort of initial exhibition that we had, Simon Starling and SUPERFLEX, Rasmus is actually the person who was responsible for bringing Die Kuh, which was actually Die Kühe, to the Augarten for about 5 months, a few years ago. And today he will speak and has a movie, Kwassa Kwassa, in the screening room, in room number 4, for you to see and view. So let's welcome Rasmus Nielsen, and thank you for being here. And please rock the boat.
Oh, okay, it's alive. Okay. Thank you, Daniela. Can everybody hear me? Yes. I will try to make this extremely short and extremely light, considering the amount of information that we just went through. And naturally also I would like to thank Olafur and TBA. And it's very rare that you see participatory projects like this one that sort of works on so many levels, socially, aesthetically, institutionally, and maybe even financially. So congratulations, Olafur. And also sort of being slightly challenged by that success, I would like to start maybe bragging a little bit, because I have also been involved with my group in what is sort of known as participatory practices, and to be honest, most of them failed, except this one. And this is a beer. It's called Free Beer, and I'll tell you the story about the beer, but I thought I would start with a small sort of participatory practice and basically sharing it with you. It's not like made like yesterday. It's a while ago, but I promise you, we tested it on Boris, who is the most courageous man in the room, and he is still alive. I think he's here. Thank you, Boris. It's very generous of you to. Let's give Boris a hand. And Boris is also my sort of spiritual advisor, and Daniela is my favorite ghostwriter, and Marcos is my favorite diver partner. And Francesca, thank you also. You put me in all kinds of odd situations. Thank you for that, like this. But can we send this beer around? Can you help me, Boris, please? So please just open it and share it, and there might not be enough for everyone, but it's called Free Beer, and Free Beer is a kind of reaction towards, you could say, the copyright regime. We did this kind of projects. I don't want to go into them now, but we had all these sort of lawsuits because we were messing up with sort of copyright stuff. And in the beginning it was sort of fun, and then it became really boring to have these sort of lawsuits going on. We copied all kinds of stuff, and we showed it, and we produced it. But then we were teaching at the IT University of Copenhagen, and that's kind of how this started. It was a pedagogical assignment to a group of computer students. The reason being that we thought maybe this sort of history in the world of computers, of open source and free software, which is basically saying, well, I create something, if I share it with you, it doesn't take anything away from me. And that became a kind of model of production. It became kind of a model that was very successful also in creating technology, Linux being maybe the prime example of that. an operating system based on the ideas of free software. So we thought maybe there's some valuable sort of experiences in this kind of thinking. That, you know, if I share something with you, it doesn't necessarily take anything away from me. And we asked the students this question, well, why not try with beer? Let's make a beer that is kind of free to copy. It is a free beer. Beer was also chosen as a medium because the creator of the Linux operating system, Torvald Linus from Finland, said, well, I'm not really interested in all this kind of freedom thing. I'm only interested in free beer. So that kind of became the cue. And then the students in the cantina of the school, we brewed up. We didn't know anything about making beer, but we made like 80 liters of beer. The student made a website. They made a press release, and we had this kind of opening thing at the school, the university. And no media people came except from a television station in Copenhagen that is run by people with, I think the political correct word is disabilities. Yeah, thank you. Cheers. Cheers. And they made this sort of short thing in there. It's a very popular television station in Denmark. They talked about it a little bit in one of their programs. And it was kind of the end of a semester sort of thing. It was Christmas. And we were like, well, this workshop was fun and it went well and we didn't really think more about it. And then journalists from other places started calling the students. The BBC called some students. Suddenly they also started calling us. And it became like an internet viral story, free beer. CNN called our office. They wanted to come. They said they were doing a free feature around the history of the open source movement. And they were doing something about Wikipedia, something about Linux, and then they wanted to do something about free beer. And we were like, well, actually, we don't really have any. We drank it all at the Christmas party. And they were like, well, never mind, you know, we'll come anyway. And they sent this sort of 3 people who were in Copenhagen 2 days. They made this portrait. We brewed up some more beer. And then they also told us that they had in the office of the CNN, they had followed the recipe, trying to make the beer. But then journalists, as we know, are not the sort of fastest animals in the forest. So they had forgot to put this sort of valve on the keg where it kind of ferments. So it blew up in the office of CNN. And when something blows up in this kind of office, a terrorist alarm goes off. So this beer was, you know, suspected of being a terrorist sort of vehicle. But this particular version here is then a later version, and it became kind of, people started using the recipe, also slightly more professional. So there was a Brazilian version suddenly appearing. We didn't have anything to do with all of these things. It just popped up online. People copied it in Taiwan, in Germany, in the US, in all kinds of places. So in that sense, it sort of worked. And, you know, maybe the moral being slightly disillusional that, you know, if you want real participation, you have to use alcohol, which is maybe a sad conclusion. But another sort of effect of beer, at least in my case, is that it makes you sort of seasick. And being seasick can do quite amazing stuff to you. You do strange things when you're seasick. You throw up, you give up, but you can also do things that you wouldn't usually do. And I did that once, and I did something that was supposedly extremely courageous. I did it because I was seasick, but I anyway did it. And it was like I was working on a ship, in the South China Sea. And one night, the ship hit a reef and in a storm, and we had to send Mayday. It was sort of very dramatic. The captain, his family was also on the boat, and the captain told me to go with his kids and his wife in a lifeboat. And some of the other people also went off in lifeboats. But when the lifeboat I was supposed to go in was leaving, I was sort of holding the rope to the boat. And for those of you with knowledge about boats, if you have two boats in a storm, they kind of do like this. It's very difficult to sort of be close to each other, because then one boat will be smashed. So when the boat was going in the water, I was holding the rope to that boat, and I couldn't let go of it. And this other sailor on the boat took my place in the lifeboat. And I was like, hey, you know, that's my seat. And you know, I'm not into this, you know, Titanic bullshit. I'm not gonna go down with this ship. And because there was only the captain left on the ship, and then another sailor, a woman, and but there was nothing. I was holding the rope. I couldn't let go of the rope. So he took my place, and then I got scared. And when you're scared, you get seasick. I never get seasick otherwise, but I was like, fuck, you know, I'm gonna die on this boat. And the captain went down to his cabin and sort of laid just on his back, and he was ready to die. It was this sort of, you know, martyrdom bullshit kind of thing starting. And there was this young female sailor and me. We were like, hey, what's going on here? You know, we need to do something. She was very skilled. So she did something very smart. We had hit the reef, and the rudder was broken, and everything was chaos. It was night, it was a storm. And then she dropped the anchor, which is sort of a smart thing to do in that particular situation. And after a couple of hours, the tide changed. So we kind of lifted. But then because of the anchor was dropped, we were kind of fixed. Otherwise, we had been, you know, just blown in further on the reef. So we were fixed, but we couldn't control the ship, because the rudder was broken. And then the captain told me, and I was extremely seasick at that point, but I didn't have anything more to throw up. So he told me, Rasmus, can you dive down and fix the rudder? And it was like a night, it was storm, but I was seasick, and when you're seasick, you don't give a shit. You just basically want to die. So they pull a rope around my body, and I jumped in the water, and I did something with the rudder, and suddenly we could kind of, with two lines, we attached two lines to the rudder on each side of the boat and took it around our bodies, and then we could kind of control the ship like this. But it was like I was doing something that I usually wouldn't do, but I only did it because I was seasick. Because when you get in the water, when you're seasick, it goes away like that. So you want to be in the water, even though it's dangerous. So we finally, we could sail the boat, and we sailed into a harbor that was like 10 hours away. But I was somehow thinking today, if I hadn't been seasick and, things had fucked up, and maybe we would have gone in another lifeboat or whatever, we might have stranded on an island. There's an island called Europe, and this particular island is very interesting because there was a lot of talk about Europe by Olafur Andreas also, that what is Europe and who is Europe? And Europe is actually an island, and it's an island in the Indian Ocean, but nobody lives there. It's a deserted island. The only sort of creatures hanging out there are turtles, and they love it. So you have these big sea turtles who come there once a year, and they lay eggs, they have sex, it's great, and they are kind of lying on top of each other, almost like the story of the sort of never-ending turtle, which you might know, but it was this famous lecture, I think, by Russell, who is telling this story about, how the universe is made, and we orbit around the sun, but we also, our whole galaxy orbits around another galaxy, and he makes this sort of huge argument about cosmic relations. And then there's an old woman in the audience that says, well, young man, it's all bullshit, because the universe is like just standing upon a turtle. Good argument. But then Russell says, I think it was Russell, but he says, well, what does the turtle then stand on? And the woman says, of course, another turtle. There's basically turtles all the way down. And I don't know, I think that's a kind of perfect metaphor for somehow Europe, that we are sort of these sort of turtles on this sort of deserted island. We are sort of the last Europeans is these turtles. But it also makes you wonder sort of what is then the original turtle? Like, is there a turtle at the end? And there actually is one. And because the name Europe comes from somewhere. And Europe was an Arabic woman, mythologically speaking, it was an Arabic woman from Lebanon who arrived to the shores of Greece on the back of a white bull, which was Zeus, who had transformed himself into a white bull. So the name Europe is actually a character who was from modern-day Lebanon, which is sort of, an odd story that I learned. I didn't know this, but I learned it on another island close to Europe. And this island is called Mayotte. And Mayotte is another strange European island, because Mayotte is part of the Comoros Islands, which are situated between Mozambique and Madagascar. It's basically 4 islands. And recently one of them, it was a French colony, part of French Africa. But recently one of these 4 islands had a referendum, and they sort of decided to become fully French again. With sort of almost sort of North Korean voting numbers, like 96% of the population voted to become part of France. So when you arrive on this island between Mozambique and Madagascar today, you get a message on your cell phone that says, "Welcome to Europe." And these are the sort of, rates of, the EU telephone, mobile relations, France Telecom, and everything is euro. There's nothing much French about things, but it's sort of an outermost region of Europe, technically speaking. So I think that's sort of very, very, very interesting that the concept of Europe is sort of blown up. And the film that Daniela kindly introduced, that is shown in there, is telling the story, because that has also created a sort of odd version of what happened or happens in the Mediterranean, because a lot of migration is going on to this particular island. Legal migration, but also to a large degree not legal migration. People come in boats every night. There's boats on the island of Mayotte from the surrounding islands. So you have a mini situation of what is happening in the Mediterranean, but in the Indian Ocean. And the French refer to this. I spoke to the French ambassador in Copenhagen, and he said, well, because I didn't understand this sort of, what is the French interest here? Why are the French doing this? And he said, well, it's the dust of the empire. It's a very French thing to say, So, that's a kind of interesting story. And please watch the film if you have the time. I think it still runs for an hour or so. But speaking about this particular European woman, the character from Greek mythology that comes from modern-day Lebanon and rides over the sea to the island of Crete on a white bull. There's another Greek woman. There's a lot of Greek women, but there's another one that I recently became quite interested in. Not like that interested, but interested. And this is the wife of the former Greek Minister of Finance. I don't know her, I've never met her, but the ex-Minister of Finance in Greece is this sort of, the last hope of Europe. I mean, he is like, a new European god. He's like, creating this, want to redefine Europe. He's making this movement that I think, it's called DM25, reinvent democracy in Europe. And he's like a great hope. He's an extremely smart guy and is a professor of game theory and has this, I think his father is from Cairo and mother he's a very interesting guy and he left the Greek government before they bended to the Germans, but he's still, he's sort of the political sort of, superstar in Europe who wants a different kind of Europe. He calls himself a Marxist, but maybe like, with an edge somehow. But his wife, she has an interesting story also. She's an artist, but she's also the character in a song. And I think this song is very interesting because it sort of, it speaks a little bit about the complexity of participation, which is also the subject here tonight. Maybe you know the song. It's a song about an art student who studied at St. Martin's. But it's like participation is not uncomplicated. And I think in the 90s we sort of used to think that participation was good. All participation was good. But then I also remember suddenly hearing, I think it was the chairman of the World Trade Foundation, the World Trade Organization, saying that World Trade Organization is basically a participatory organization. So the word had kind of, gone from this sort of experimental art practices and it had merged into the chairman, the president of the World Trade Organization. And in theory, he's right, because that organization actually works on the basis of if somebody disagrees with something, it can't be done. So it's a bit like the hippie community Christiania in Copenhagen. If there's somebody in this room that don't agree with, where we are, the decisions we're taking, it can't be made. So Nigeria can oppose the United States import tax on corn, and the United States will have to change it. But we also know it doesn't mean that this is just a democratic sort of bliss. The WTO is a very powerful organization, and if Nigeria does this kind of stuff, there will be precautions in other ways. So participation, can also be an exercise of power, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't create participatory elements, but it has that. It doesn't mean that power just disappears into thin air. Another issue with that kind of practice is, of course, also what does it mean when we, as people with a certain financial surplus or whatever, middle class cultural surplus, whatever you call it, does projects that involves people from other, you could say, classes. What are we actually doing? And I want to shoot myself in the foot at the end of this short talk a little bit by playing this song that is about the wife of the ex-finance minister of Greece. He's called Vanis Varoufakis. I think that's his name. But the song, I'll just play an instrumental version of it. Maybe you know it. Does it ring a bell? I promise I'm not going to sing, but But if I just read the text here. She came from Greece. She had a thirst for knowledge. She studied sculpture at St. Martin's College. That's where I caught her eye. She told me that her dad was loaded. I said, in that case, I'll have a rum and Coca-Cola. She said, fine. And in 30 seconds time, she said, I want to live like common people. I want to do whatever common people do. I want to sleep with common people. I want to sleep with common people like you. And then they go to a supermarket. And, you know, this character who's, you know, telling the story is like trying to introduce her to common people. You know, they play pool and they smoke cigarettes and they get drunk, but he's somehow disappointed because it's not working. He feels that this character is not able to transgress, you know, what she's trying to do. And then he concludes at the end of the song. But still, you'll never get it right, because when you're laid in bed at night, watching roaches climb the wall, if you called your dad, he could stop it all. You'll never live like common people. You'll never do whatever common people do. You'll never fail like common people. You'll never watch your life slide out of you and dance and drink and screw, because there's nothing else to do. You'll never understand how it feels to live your life with no meaning or control and with nowhere left to go. Thank you.